Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're doing a new video. We're gonna integrate a payment acceptance capability using a payment gateway into our online store that was built using ReactJS. This is my dummy store over here. I add some cart items to it like this, and I check my cart. Here's my items. Too much, I can delete them. Just add 4 items. Then I check out like this. I pay. Then it's asked me to authenticate the payment, but this is a simulator. In production, you would see your bank actual authentication page. Oopsie. Then after the payment is done, I'm redirected back to my website and it shows me that the payment was confirmed. Here's my receipt number and here's my items. Okay, I'll show you how this is implemented end to end. It works like this. This is the flow diagram. All the nerds love this. For the payment gateway, we're using the checkout.com API. We basically have an SDK from them, a JavaScript SDK that let us submit the card information directly to them, not through my server, directly to them, which makes me PCI compliant because I'm not handling any card information in my system. I'm just pushing it directly to checkout.com and they give me a token. And then I use that token to pay instead of the actual card information. That token points to the card. So then I can send a payment request to my server, supplying that token and the amount and the currency and other information about the order. And my server then talks to the checkout.com API, requests the payment. Checkout.com returns the URL for that authentication page that I was just showing you, and then that gets sent back to the client. The client redirects the customer to that authentication page so they can authenticate their payment. Then the customer is taken all the way to their issuing bank website. That page is not a checkout.com or your client page. It's the issuer bank page, and it looks different from a card to a card. Some of them require authentication using a one-time password. Some of them requiring PIN. Some of them require, password, whatever. Some of them don't require anything at all, and they just return it back to the website. But once that is done, the customer returns to the website. Then the client side requests from the server side the payment result, which requested from checkout.com. Checkout.com returns that to the server, which then returns it to the website, and the payment is done. Okay, now I'll show you how to implement this from scratch. Okay, so this is again my dummy website, but without payment part, right? So I'm now gonna add payment capability to it. This button doesn't do anything. So first, let's start with the cart field. How do we get that? Well, checkout.com, which is our payment gateway in this case, has a JavaScript library that you could use in your project to basically add this form into your website. Right, it's the same form that we used. It looks really nice and neat. You can just add it to your JavaScript project like this, or you'll Google React frames, and then you find out that they do have a React component that you could use and make things easier and more convenient. So you can just install this in your project. So sometimes after installation, you're gonna get a random error like this. You just gotta rerun the React project, and that should fix it most of the time. There you go. Now let's just replace this with the card input frame that we're gonna use. So for that, go back to the documentation, so right here, and here they will give you the instructions of how to install it. First, you need to import this script into your public HTML file. So you go here, you go to public, you go to index.html, and you add the JavaScript library here in the head of your project. So that's done. Now, second thing, you want to add the frame. There are multiple options of how you can do this. The single line component is the neat looking component that you saw in here. So we want to use this. For that, grab the code, slap it here, refresh, and now it's going to tell you frames not there. Card frame is also not there, so you got to import them. And that tells you what you need to import. So grab this, go back here. We have frames. What we don't have is, as per the error, card frame. Save, refresh. There you go. Now this is our field here. So this looks good. Now I just need to replace this ugly button with my own button. So for that, I'll just use my own Material UI button component. And then here I'll just say pay the total amount, which is, I'm getting it here using my reduce method. So I'll just put it here next to the dollar. Okay, now this looks better. Let's test if it works. The test card is 4242424242, and then any date in the future, and then 100 as a CVV. The reason I know this is because you can Google, and it'll be the first link right here. This is the test card. Okay. Now, if this works, it should print out the token that you can use for the payment then. Of course, I've dealt with the course issues by installing this extension. Install this so you can develop on localhost. Otherwise, it's going to block your request. And this is our token. This token has been generated. We can use this for payment. But before you go ahead, here they just put up their own public key. You need to replace this with the public key that you obtained from checkout.com. So you go to your portal, you sign in. This is me signing into my account. Then you go over here, developers, keys, and you can create your keys here using the button create new key. I take my public key, I copy it, and go back here, replace it with this. Make sure there's no annoying white spaces, and test again. See if your key is correct. Pay. There you go. The token was generated, so it means it's working fine. But when I click on the button, it just stays there. There's nothing to indicate to the user that this is loading. To solve that, I can just over here do card submitted, handle the event of when card gets submitted, and here I can trigger the loading. So I can just do the true, and this will switch this, and this will let this circular progress view appears. So when I click here, the loading view appears, which is much more user-friendly. Okay, so this is how we generate the token. Now we're gonna show you how do we make a payment. I'll take the token that I get here from card tokenized, and I'll apply it to my backend server to pay instead of displaying it to the user here. So let's create a new method called payment request, and here is we're gonna go do our API call. So now it's time to develop some backend code. A payment request will look typically like this. Your callbacks, for testing, I'm putting it as localhost. I generate a random order ID just for testing on Postman. You need to set the captcha to true so that it can debit the customer right away instead of just holding the amount. Reference, your own reference, processing channel ID. You get this also from the portal. You need to include this. You need to include this. Otherwise, the transaction is going to get rejected by the API, I mean. So you just get this from, go to your secret key here, and your channel ID will be right here. Just take this and slap it here. Okay, currency USD. The amount is in cents, so this is actually $65. 3 days to enable so they can do the authentication, and this is the token that you get from the server side. Let's try it here. I get my token, I can go here, and for the authorization I'm using bearer authorization, and I just slap my secret key right here. Token here, send the request. What's wrong? Sorry for that, my bad. I put the wrong secret key, so now it should work. Sorry, I forgot the channel ID. There you go. Now when I send the request, the API responds with this link, and when I take this link and I open it, it will give me the authentication page that I showed you guys earlier. After I do this, it's gonna redirect me back to the URL that I specify here for failure and success. So this is what it looks like. This is how you use it. Now we need to implement it in actual backend server endpoint. To develop my endpoint, I'm gonna initialize a Firebase functions project so I can develop my endpoint. This is my favorite way of developing backend services for my apps real quick. Okay, I set up my empty endpoint, and here it is. I tested it. It works. It returns hello from Firebase. Now, these are the things that I gotta supply in my request, and what my client side will also supply in the request. And now I just need to code the same to be received in here. So let's do that. First thing, for the purpose of testing and to deal with course issues, I'm gonna add this course library here. That's gonna help me with testing on the staging, testing from the browser side without belonging to a server. So this is very helpful to use if you're stuck with course issues. Now I can start coding inside it here. Now in my case, the first thing I want to do is that I want to create the order in my database. So when the user sends a request to pay, I create an order in my database to just record it. Okay. Then once that is done, I actually send a call to checkout.com to request the payment. I catch my error, And over here, I just use Axios to basically do the same thing that I'm doing here in Postman. So here, you need to put async because you're using await. And I'm using Postman. I'm sending the request. I'm using Axios. I'm sending a request to this URL, just like here. So I'm just following this template, sending this URL, post. I get my token from the client side. I get the option to use 3DS from the client side, which is the authentication from the client side. My channel, I need to update it. This is the wrong value. Actually, it is the correct value, but make sure your channel ID is here. Reference, I don't really need to create a random reference like this. I can just use the same order ID that I'm supplying. So I put this here, capture true, and localhost, make sure the localhost port is the same one you're testing on. So I'm using localhost 3001. So I gotta use the same thing here. Okay. Now in my headers, that's where I include my authorization header and my secret key. Okay. Once that is complete, then you want to handle what happens after the payment is sent and catch your errors. Here I am catching my error. And what I do actually after my API request to checkout succeeds is that I update the base, the database saying that the order was authorized. Of course, you need to add async here too. So I update my order in the database with the status that I get from checkout.com, and I associate my database or my order in the database with the checkout.com ID. This is a good idea to keep track of things. Then once that is done, I send this to the client side, which is basically the payload that I get from checkout.com. I send it as it is, the client. Now let's test this to see if it's working on the emulator. These are my inputs. I just need to get a new token from the client side, so I get a new token. Again, using the test card. This is I got my token. I put it here. Now I send this request. See what happens. It's successful. I get the response back from checkout.com, and let's see what happens in the database to match with the one that I made. Mine starts with 312. So this is it here in the database. You can see the amount in cents, the currency, the items that have passed, and the status pending. So all of this makes sense. Good. So we finished. We developed the endpoint for payment successfully. Now we just gotta deploy it. So I'll deploy using Firebase deploy. Again, I'm using Firebase to simplify my life. You could be deploying your endpoints, your backend services using any other service, maybe Amazon or Google or whatever. But I prefer to use Firebase here, Google Firebase. So let's wait for this to be deployed, then we can continue. Okay, so my endpoint has been deployed successfully, and I have the URL for it right here. Now I need to integrate it with my lovely website over here. So to do that, let's go to our payment request where the payment gets triggered, which is right here. Currently, I'm not doing anything but displaying the token in the console. Here, I want to use Axios to send the post request. So Axios post, first thing is the URL, second thing is the data. Remember, I want to use the same format for the data in here that I'm using here. So amount, token, currency, use 3DS, order ID. It's very simple. So again, amount, just like this. I get my amount again as a total of the cart items. The token is the one that I get from the frames library. The currency is the always, or whatever currency you want to use. I choose to use 3DS by default. I supply my cart items as an array of JSON. This gets recorded in my database, and then my order ID is, I have this function that generates a random 8-digit string, which I use to generate my order IDs and then send it over. So that I also need to supply. If your server backend requires any type of authentication, you also need to supply it here. In my case, I'm not using any of that because I'm lazy and I just want to make a video. But you should secure your server. Okay, so once you do that, now you need to handle the response when it's successful. And as always, as a good practice, you need to always catch the error if there is any. I like to just display payment failed. Please try again if there's an error. And then I get the API response from the server, which is the one that I showed you in Postman. Would look like this. And you need to get this URL and then redirect the user to it. Of course, this is if it's pending. If it's authorized, then you won't be redirecting. You won't be redirecting to any link. You just redirect them to a result page and show them the result. So here, I'm handling each scenario just as a good practice. If it's pending, means that a URL has been returned, then I redirect the user to that URL which is the authentication URL. If it just authorized means the payment is done, then I just send them right away to the result. If it's failed without even any authentication, I'll also send them to the result page and retrieve the result. Either case, I will always be able to retrieve the result using the ID here, which is the payment ID. Okay, so that does that. Now let's test it with the endpoint implement and see what happens. Pay. Now it's gonna get the token and then redirect me to the authentication page instead of just getting the token like before. So it got the token. Now it should redirect me because it got the URL back. There you go. We get redirected, and then after the payment is back, it redirects me. Ignore the error for a second, but notice that it redirects me to the let me just extend this so you can see. It redirects me to the result page as I told it to, and then it appends an identifier here on top of it, which I can then send to my server again and then use it to retrieve the payment response. This is my result React page. It looks like this. As soon as as soon as the page shows, I call this get payment result. Get payment result currently doesn't do anything, but it's supposed to send an API request to my server, which, like this diagram says, it should do step 9, 10, 11, 12. So let's do that. Let's implement the get request. Now it's saying cannot read the properties of null status. Let me show you where that happens. This is because in my render method, I display the result depending on what was the payment outcome was, if it failed or if it's successful. So here in order result, I check the payload that I get from the server, okay? And then if it's captured, I show a successful screen with the items in it in the receipt. If it's failed, I just tell them to try again like this, okay? So now let's implement the get request for the payment. Again, I get a session ID that gets returned on top of my URL here, as you can see, this one. I can grab this and do a get request in Postman here to get the result of the payment, like this. Oops, I gotta update my secret key again. Updated my secret key, now it should work. There we go. So I get the payment result by just doing a get request. So this is what I want to implement in the backend. Okay, I got my endpoint here. What do I need to do? I need to do something similar to what I did with before. I need to get the payment result from checkout.com API, and also I want to update my database with the status of the payment. Again, add course in the project because it's going to cause you troubles later while you're testing in the staging, in the test environment. So you need this for the test environment again. Now the way we're going to send the get request from the client side to our backend, we're gonna just do a get request, and we're gonna append the payment ID, the session ID on the top of the on the URL. We append it to the URL, so it should be here. We're gonna test with this payment ID that we got from our previous payment. We're gonna try to retrieve this. Okay, so to get the access this from the request URL here, you don't need to do anything special. You just take the request URL, access it, split it using the slash, and then pop will give you the last item in that array, and the last item is gonna be the payment ID, just like this. Now you can work on sending the request. Await axios.get, and then you put the URL here. It's gonna be the same URL here from get payment, except you're gonna pin to it the payment ID. Okay. Now, you don't need any data, so you don't need to send anything here. You just need to include your secret key in the headers. So you skip the second space and just go straight to the headers like this. Okay, save. And then now you start handling the response. Then CKO API result. There's an error. I'll say I'm unable to get the result. If I'm able to get the result successfully from checkout.com API, then I need to update my database and then send the response back to the user. So I get the Firebase document like this. In my case, I use the admin SDK, backend SDK, to access Firestore, and then collections, and then I get my orders collection, and then I get my order ID again from the checkout.com API payload because I supplied it to in the transaction first request. This is how I can get the order ID back on checkout.com. Now I can update the order. I'll do that simply just like this. So what's happening here? First, if there's an error, I catch it again. I say fail to update the database. The transaction would have been successful, but the database error the database update was probably failed, in that case, the customer will probably reach out to your customer support saying, hey, I paid, but it's not registering, and they call you or email you, and then you're gonna look in the checkout.com console to see if the payment actually happened, and then you can either refund them or issue the service to them. So here, I update the order with this data, with the status. I update the status and I update the date. Then I get the document, which contains the order details, and I send it back to the user, just like this. So the response back to the client will contain the order ID, which will be the receipt, which is also I assign as the document ID, the items, and the status of the order. That's it. Now let's test it. I have it here in Postman. Nope, not this one. Here. There you go. My endpoint is successfully returning the status, the items, and the order ID, which is all I need from a client side. Now I can implement it there. So let's deploy this to production. Firebase deploy. There you go. My endpoint has been deployed to production, and I have the URL right here. Now I need to go to my result page, which is here. I'm gonna switch over to my result page here, and instead of doing nothing, what I'll do is that I'll use Axios again. Axios to actually it should be the capital like this. Axios get, and I'll put the URL, no data, and then I just handle then like this, and then I handle my error too. Now here all I'm doing is that with the response is that I'm just logging it and setting the setting the payload for the response as the state, and then I use my state variable to parse the result across my website. And here, if there's an error, I just throw an error, and I just show an alert to the user like this. So I'm getting 500 error because the session ID probably expired. So I also, because I'm not actually supplying the payment ID here in the URL, so I forgot to do that. Now, in my case, I just use this to get the URL to get the session ID from the URL, like this, and then I take this and then I append it on the URL like here. Okay, now we need to try again. We need to do another payment again because the session ID that we have is expired. So let's go to the cart and pay. Token generated. Now it's going to send it to server. Server returns the URL for 3DS. I complete the challenge. The payment is done. Now it's retrieving the payment response from the server. There you go. The response is logged here in the result, and this is the confirmation page for the payment. And it's done. We integrated. We integrated successfully. We're able to process payments and get the results. And let's see what it looks like in the database. Not sure which one it is. So let's check our logs again. Here it's ZX2. So it's this one, ZX2. USD paid amount. This is the items captured, and this is the checkout.com ID in case I need to go. In case I need to go grab this and go to my portal here and look for my order. So this is why I recorded it in my database. Let's say if there's a dispute or something like that, I can just go here and look for the order. So that's why I recorded. Now let's test a failed scenario. So here in the test cards, you can see that they have this card for failed response code. So let's try it out. We submit the payment. Token is generated, sent to the server. The server returns the 3DS URL. The client side then returns to the 3DS URL. Chrome is asking to save the card, and there's no 3DS. It fails right away, and when it fails, my result page reads that and says order failed, please reach out to customer support, and you can click here to go back to the cart and try again. That's it. Very simple, very easy, really easy API to use. It took me like an hour, less than an hour to implement this, to be honest. Hope you enjoyed this video, hope it was helpful. Feel free to ask any questions in the description box, and if you would like access to the full source code for this project and support the channel, check my Patreon link in the description box below. See you next time.